I don't know, he's on my screen, he's in the top corner up there, Mart, who's come along to join us and have a chat with us this evening about World War I and scouting and bits and pieces like that. So I'll hand you over to Mart, if that's okay, Mart.
Thank you very much, John. For those watching on the Facebook chat, you might hear some background noise. That is, we're currently doing our first live Zoom presentation. So, ladies and gents, my name's Martin. I'm currently a serving police officer in central London. I also belong to a group called the Great War Society. Now what we do is we dress up in First World War uniforms and we present these sort of things all over the country, all over the world for young people. I'm also a scout leader, and in my early days of scouting I sort of merged the two hobbies together. So I also do battlefield tours over in Belgium for scout groups who want to go and see the battlefield from there. And normally I would go into scout halls up and down the country dressed in this clobber and do face-to-face talks from there. But obviously we can't do that at the moment. Now, you guys are the first group that I've done a Zoom call with. And I really do want this work. I want you guys to not just sit there and listen to me talk, because I go into tape player mode, you see, and it just repeat myself and repeat myself and repeat myself. So, we've only got a very short period of time because we've got another one afterwards. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a quick talk, and the talk will cover the First World War. It will then also cover what Scouts did during the First and Second World War and why we do remembrance. If you've got any questions, we'll have a little bit of time at the end, but if you just pen them down, and then if you've got any questions you want to ask me afterwards, talk to your leader, send them through, and I'll do a group video based on all the questions from there. Okay, so let's begin. So, I'm dressed in the uniform. This is the 1902 pattern tunic, designed by the King. So the King, every time a uniform went through for a new design, he designed it. And it's based on his hunting jacket. Now it's cool. It's made of wool, and it's a khaki colour, which comes from the Indian word meaning dusty. So it's your first form of camouflage. 20 years before the First World War, in 1914, we went to war in a colour very similar to this, so you could be seen from miles around. But we got the idea of your first form of camouflage. The Germans also had the same idea, so they have a field grey, a very sort of, it's almost like a blanket material sort of colour. The French, on the other hand, they haven't got the right idea. They go to war in blood red trousers, sky blue jackets and white gloves, so they can be seen from miles around. But we're going to start all the way in the beginning. Why did the First World War start? Well, you have a country which no longer exists, is Austro-Hungary, which is now Austria and Hungary. They were not very nice to the Serbs. Okay, so the Serbs assassinated their king, Archduke Ferdinand. They weren't very happy about that, so they went to war with the Serbs. The Serbs were allied with Russia. The Russians decided to go to war with Austro-Hungary. Austro-Hungary were friends with the Germans, and the Germans decided, right, we're going to have ourselves a little bit of a war here. Now, 20 years before, they went to war with the French in the Franco-Prussian War. So the Germans decided we're going to go to war with the Russians, but we're also going to take France at the same time. So they decided, what we're going to do, we can't really go across the French border because there's lots of forts there, but the easy way through is through Belgium. Now, we have a treaty with the Belgians because the Belgians are a neutral country. They don't want to go to war. And as soon as they step into Belgium, we have to, as Englishmen, we have to go and help them. Brave little Belgium. Now, we go over there to protect the Belgians. We're not really bothered about the French because the French have always been our natural enemy. 100 years before the First World War, you had the Napoleonic Wars where we were at war with them. But it's our duty to help the brave little Belgians. So, 240,000 troops of the British Expeditionary Force, that is the regular army, the best army we've ever had, go to war and go and defend Belgium. Now, they go to a little town called Mons, and 240,000 of them, sounds like good numbers. The Germans, on the other hand, have 1.6 million coming towards us. But when the Germans come against the British Army, they think they're coming up against machine guns, and that's because we're the best trained army in the world, because we are issued with this. This is the short magazine Lee Enfield rifle. I'm a boy of Enfield, and this is made about 5 miles away from where I lived. So, it's a bolt action rifle. This magazine here contains 10 rounds of .303 ammunition. And every man is trained to fire 23 bullets per minute. That's not 23 bullets just firing away. Any of you play Call of Duty, you can do 23 bullets in seconds. That's 23 bullets hitting the target. That's 23 dead Germans. So every time you load it, you open the bolt, close it up, and fire. And the reason, because if you could fire 23 rounds, you got an extra day's pay. So you'd get £1 a day, which is the equivalent of sixpence. Okay, 12 pence. If you got your 12, if you could fire well, you got your shilling for your day's work, and you also got an extra shilling for being a good marksman. So everyone made sure they were good on this rifle. Now, at the end of the rifle, we have a wonderful bit of machinery. This, the 18-inch bayonet. Now, the reason we have such a long bayonet on the end of this rifle, now this, it makes it about a length of about 6 foot, so that keeps you away from the enemy, about 6 feet. But the handy thing about it is it's for taking on cavalry, people on the back of horses. So you see, horses are very clever animals. They won't run on the end of this point. Germans and Turks, on the other hand, will do. But by the time we get to the Second World War, the bayonet has got to about this length here, because that's all you need. We haven't got horses at the time. But sadly, even though we're the best trained army in the world, the best army Britain has ever seen, there's still 1.6 million Germans coming at us. So we retreat. We have to run away. It's what retreating really is. It's just basically running away. But we have to get ourselves into a nice, comfortable position. So we walk and we walk and we walk, and we come to a place called Ypres, which is near the Belgian border. Sorry, it's on the Belgian French border, and we need to hold this place because near to it we have all the docks, all the ports, and if the Germans take all the docks and ports, we can't survive. We have to go a really long way to get over there. So we dig in, we dig trenches, we get ourselves down below the ground because there's bombs going off everywhere. The Germans have also got bullets and machine guns, and they're going to start firing at us, so we get ourselves low and low and low below the ground. Now, when I'm in this low area, as you can see, I'm wearing this absolutely stunning stiff cap. Now, the red bit on top, not every soldier wears one of those, because I portray a military foot policeman, because I'm a police officer in my daily job. So this wouldn't be here, but it is a very nice, smart cap. The only problem is, when you get into the trenches, they get quite wet and get quite muddy. So, what we do is we take the stiffener out the cap, and they produce these lovely little soft trench caps that we have here. And this is called a gore blimey, and it keeps your ears nice and warm, and it's very nice and waterproof on the inside. So it's Christmas 1914. It's quite cold. It's one of the coldest winters we've ever had. We've dug in the trenches. Now we're below ground. The Germans are a little bit over there. Her Majesty, Queen Alexandra, she brings us a present. Now this is a Mary tin. Every serving soldier who's across abroad got given one of these. And inside it you'd have all manners of things. You've got a bullet pencil, and you can write a postcard home. You've got a picture of Her Majesty and the King. There's also a couple of packages of cigarettes in there to keep you going, but if you don't smoke, they can give you chocolate as well. So whilst those troops are sit there with their lovely little Christmas present, the Germans, you hear them singing, "Und Tannenbaum, ich finde Rose leder." What on earth are they doing? The Germans come out of their trenches. They're not there with rifles. They've got Christmas trees with candles on, and they start to come towards us. Now, this is a little bit of a myth during the First War. Quite famously, yes, there was one game of football played between the two sides. But that was only in one part. In some parts of the line, there wasn't a truce. And sometimes you talk to the veterans, they go, yeah, we played football, but we didn't play with the Germans. We didn't want to. We didn't quite trust them. But between the time of Christmas Eve and New Year's Day, parts of the line, there was no fighting whatsoever. So they had that little bit of respite. This would be the last time this ever happened. Because in April 1915, the Germans start to use horrible things. They unleash a thing called gas. Now, I'll take you back to an area called Saint-Julien, a beautiful little village just north of Ypres. In the line there, we have our friends who are the Canadians. The Canadians are the first part of our Commonwealth, all part of the many nations that make up the Commonwealth forces. They're the first ones to get over to France. To the left of us, we have the Algerians. Now, these are brave fighting troops of the French colonies. Right-hand side, we've got the French. Now, the Germans unleash chlorine gas. Now, we all know when we go swimming, your eyes start to sting a little bit. Just think of it 100 times worse. Your eyes start to bleed and you start coughing up your own lungs. So, the Algerians, the gas comes across, hits the Algerians. They're brave men of Africa. They will stand there and fight, but they succumb to the gas and fall over. The French, they see the gas and they do what the best thing a Frenchman can do. They run away. The Canadians, on the other hand, have been warned about the gas, and what they're told to do is to wee on their handkerchiefs and stick them over their mouths. Now, inside your urine, there's a lot of pneumonia, and that helps soak up the gas. So the Canadian troops, their little town of Saint-Julien, they stopped the Germans in their tracks. So for a couple of months, we've got to urinate on our handkerchiefs. But you ask yourself the question, what if I don't need to go? British Army thinks of that. They give you an empty tin in the morning, you fill it up, and you leave it, and you get ready for the gas to come. So, but eventually we have to come up with different ways of seeing off this gas. So, we have this here. This is the P hood. No, the P doesn't stand for what you think it does. That's for phosphate. So it's bicarbonate of soda inside this. You can wear it for about 15 minutes in a gas attack, but what you have to do is you wear 2 masks, and you have the bicarbonate of soda there, and you keep dipping it in, changing, chopping and changing. And the thing is, because it's so close to your face, as you start to sweat, the chemical goes onto your skin, so it becomes null and void. A couple months later, they introduce this. This is the hypo hood. So, you've got 15 seconds to get this over your head. Full protection round the neck. And the handy thing is, I've got these lovely eye holes here that I can see through, and I have this outtake valve from here. And I can wear this for about a half an hour at a time. I do start to look like a womble and talk like the Elephant Man, but it does save me in the long run. However, as the war progresses, the gases get worse. So they have Blue Cross gas, phosgene gas. Some of the gases are designed to just give you a cold, but that still takes you out the line. Mustard gas comes in. And mustard gas is a particularly horrible piece of equipment, a horrible gas, because it doesn't just muck your lungs up, it also burns your skin. So the sweaty parts of your body are affected. That's why after 1917 the Scottish stopped wearing kilts. But this small box respirator, which I wear, is what we think of a common gas mask today.
I'm going to go on Tuesday.
So inside this canister here, I have a wonderful thing called asbestos and charcoal, and that will keep my lungs very safe away from the gas. However, when I'm in the trenches, the gas will seep into my tunic. So if I'm out on night patrol and it's very cold, and I go into a dugout, go into a barn, start to warm myself up by the fire, the gas then starts to seep out of my tunic, burning me and gassing my friends around me. So, as you can see, we have the soft cap, the gore blimey, but inside the trenches we have a bit of a problem. And that's shrapnel. Shrapnel is the little lumps of metal that come off the shells. When they explode, they go and splinter everywhere. And quite a lot of men are getting head injuries. So we introduced this. By 1916, we have the steel helmet, the Brodie helmet. And you never wear the chin strap on your chin, because soldiers believe if they get hit and it goes back, it will break their necks. So they keep the strap on the back of the neck from there. This isn't bulletproof, it's just a single plate of steel, but it does the job. Now, onto the German stuff. So the Germans go to war in these spiky helmets like this. This is a pickelhaube. And the idea, what do we think the reason for the spike is? Is it so we can just go and headbutt someone like that? No, sadly it's not that. Not that. All that big would be quite funny. So what you've got to imagine is you had cavalry. People on the back of horses with big swords. And the idea was, if the cavalryman tried to hit you with his sword, it would glance off the spike. So that's why they had the spikes on the top of their helmets. It's also so you could be seen from a fair old distance. But the Germans also got the right idea, because this is made of leather. And of course it won't stop a bullet. So the Germans decide to create this. And this is the Stellhelm. As you can see, quite a nice design. It takes a lot of energy to make one of these. Now, if it was well worn properly, it'd be hanging off my ears underneath here. And if there's an explosion, you get a vibration that goes through there. So a lot of Germans were deaf by the end of the war because they heard all the sound reverberating off there. You'll also notice I've got these two stag horns here. Now, these stag horns are designed so I can put a metal plate on the front, and I've got a little bit of extra body armour. Now, when we went to war in 1914, we had 2 boxes of grenades, 2 boxes of bombs for the entire army. It was only 24 bombs. And they were given to the Royal Engineers. Now, they were long old things, and they had a thing called a percussion cap on the top of it. And the idea was, when it got hit, it exploded. Only problem is, when you go into a trench, and you throw it back like that, the thing blows up. So, we haven't got a bomb for a long old while. What actually happens is the jam tin we used to go wee-wee in, this suddenly becomes a bomb. So what we do is we fill it full of gun cotton, any type of explosive we can get our hands on, and any rusty nails, anything you want to stick into a German, and you put a string fuse with a swan vesta match on the top. You either strike it off a bit of sandpaper on your tunic, or set light to it with your fag and throw it. Now, strike it off your tunic, the fuse falls out. Light it with your cigarette, it blows up in your face. You throw it, and it lands in the mud. So, a French professor comes along, and he comes up with this. He says, you give me the materials I shall make you a bomb from here. So that professor gave us this, and this is the Batty bomb. Professor Batty was his name. So, same thing, fill it full of gun cotton, but these little segments here are designed to explode into loads of pieces and kill you from there. The Germans, on the other hand, they've got this thing here. This is the potato masher. In here is a little porcelain pulley. Give it a pull, you hear the crack, you've got 7.5 seconds before this thing goes off. This is made by the same people who make your Christmas crackers. But you see there's no indentations, there's nothing here. This just kills you from the blast, not the shrapnel. By 1916, we produced this. This is the Mills bomb, and still used all over the world today. This is your archetypal hand grenade. What you do is you hold on to it as long as you want to, pull the pin, never use your teeth like you see in the war films, it will just pull your teeth straight out, and you throw it. But there's a safety on it, so when you release, that safety flies off, and you've got 3.5 seconds to go from there. Now, a lot of people think that soldiers were stuck in the trenches for months at a time. This is very untrue. You spend 3 days in the front line, 3 days in reserve, and then you've got to do all your training. So if you've got to get given a new gas mask, you've got to go for training for that, you've got to go for training for bombing, and various things from there. So soldiers were rotating all the time. The average soldier, he gets 3 days holiday a year, so he can go back to England for a couple of days. You do get the opportunity to, it's not just because it's not it's not easy to travel now, is it? But you can be in France in 5 hours. Back then, it would take you several days to get across to get yourself to your front line. So you literally travelled for a week, spent 3 days at home, and then went back. But the average soldier only saw 3 days fighting a year, and that's because, well, there wasn't a lot of fighting going on. But as soon as we dug in, as soon as the Germans had dug in, they decided that, the Germans were there for the long haul. So they would just build, their trenches were immaculate. They had running water, they had electricity inside the trenches. British soldiers, on the other hand, we're there on the defensive, we're there on the attack, so we don't want to get ourselves too comfy. So we just stayed in the low ground and would attack when we could. How we dig the trenches. So, every soldier is issued with this. This is an entrenching tool. Comes apart, sits on your equipment, take it out when you need to, and you have a bad back after digging a trench with this. But the idea is that you have two people, one person with a rifle, one person with this. He digs a hole big enough for you two to stand in, and then you start to go side to side and dig trenches from there. Now, trenches are dug in a zigzag shape, and this is so imagine the zigzag, if you're looking from the top like that. It's designed so if an explosion happens in the trench, it doesn't go for the full length of the trench, it only goes at one section of it. So, that is a very basic history of the First World War, a basic history of the equipment. It now brings me on to what the Scouts did during the First World War. Now, Scouting, as we know, started in 1907 by Robert Baden-Powell. He took a load of boys over to Brownsea Island and he started his experiments, which went on to snowball into what we are today. So, 3 of the lads who went on that expedition over to Brownsea Island sadly died during the First World War. It's estimated that 17,500 scouts joined the British Army in 1914 and for the progression of the war. Estimated about 500 of those who died during the war, and several Victoria Crosses. Now, the Victoria Cross is the highest award for bravery you can get in the British Army, and the Scouts, we won quite a big percentage. About 10% of the VCs won during the First World War were from Scouts. 3 of them I will talk about. Jack Cornwall, which we still have an award in Scouting today, the Cornwall Award, and this is for someone who sadly dies in their scouting career, maybe helping someone else, or it may be they have a very bad illness, but they carry on doing their duty for scouting. And Jack Cornwall, he was the youngest Victoria Cross winner of the First World War. He was in the Navy. Now, you could join the Navy at 12 back in those days, and you'd be a boy. And what his job was, he worked on a radio, and he'd stand on the gun, and you'd have the officer going, right, can you just go up, put it up a little bit, fire it from there, and he was relaying the story from there, relaying to the gun crew what to do. Sadly, his crew got hit directly by the Germans, but he was the last man standing on the gun, and he remained there relaying the story to the officers from up there. And at the age of 14, he earned his Victoria Cross. Sadly, he passed away a couple of days later. But he is a Scout VC. Albert Ball from Nottingham. He was a fighter pilot during the First World War with the Royal Flying Corps, a very new thing. And he had several. It was an air race, and he was a Scout from Nottingham. And one of the lads that I often go to the grave of him, and he is a Scout leader from Port Talbot, a bloke by the name of Rupert Hallows. Now, what had happened? The Battle of Sanctuary Wood had raged on. His men had been blown up by a mine underneath them. It killed about 75 of his men. He needed to stop the Germans from attacking. So when the chips were down and there was no bombs available, he ran and he got the bombs and he gave it for his men. He carried them on. He kept them going with all the possible vigour that he could do. He inspired his men to carry on. And for me, that is what a Scout leader should do. But as for the home front, what did Scouts do? Now, Cubs started during the First World War, but what did the Scouts and the Guides do? Now, what they did is they became the land army. So you'd normally have regiments all over England who would be looking after things like railways, all those important structures. The Scouts used to do that. They would protect the railway. The Sea Scouts would look over the sea, looking out for spies coming in, German ships. A couple of Scouts sadly died on these duties. Some were hit by trains. Other Scouts, the place called Hartlepool, this was where the Navy bombed Hartlepool from the sea. The Navy shot shells, and sadly one of the Scouts was killed there. But we also have Albert Payne, who is his job was to blow the bugle whilst driving his bicycle. And because during the First World War we had a blitz, we had the Germans coming over and we had them bombing us in Zeppelins, big balloons and bombers. And his job was to cycle around, warning people of what was about to come, but also telling people that it was all safe to come out. And sadly, one of the bombs hit his house whilst he was about to go out for his duty, so he died on his duty from there. But Scouts were a very integral part of the UK back then. They were there to help the farmers pick the crops. They were running messages for the army. And just to think that at the time, it was 1917, Scouting was only 10 years old, and it became such a big thing. By the time of the Second World War, Scouting was even bigger. Now, just before the Second World War, there was a jamboree in Holland, which everyone went over to, except for the Germans. Scouting was banned in Germany under the Nazi reign of Hitler. They created his own one called the Hitler Youth. But when Germany invaded all these countries, Scouts stood firm. It was illegal to be a Scout. You couldn't wear your uniform. You couldn't have meetings. You weren't allowed to do this. And if you did, this could be under the penalty of death. So, some had meetings in secret. Some became members of the resistance, fighting against the Germans within their home countries. Some escaped to England or other countries that weren't invaded at the time. They joined those armies to go and fight. At the end of the Second World War, so Holland, right next door to Germany, the English hadn't quite liberated everything. We hadn't freed everyone by the time the war ended. And Amsterdam was free on the 8th of May, the day the war finished. And what happened was the Germans, they gave up. They knew the war was over. But some of them hadn't given up their machine guns. And when the Dutch were partying in the streets, they started to machine gun the civilians. Scouts came out in their uniforms, carrying the Red Cross flag, and they were picking the wounded up and helping those on the street. And that's what a good Scout should always do. The next part brings me on to the Act of Remembrance. Now, sadly, this year we won't be having the normal parades we do. And the symbol of that is the poppy. This time of year, you'll see loads of people wearing them. But what is the poppy? Why do we wear it? And it all starts with a poem. In Flanders fields the poppies blow, between the crosses row on row. The marks are placed, and in the sky the lark so bravely singing flies. Scarce hurts amidst the gums below, we are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe, and be it from failing hands we throw the torch, be it yours to hold, though poppies grow in Flanders fields. Now in Flanders is the part of Belgium, and all around there you still today the poppies grow, and soldiers saw this flower even when everything's been completely bombed, destroyed, there is nothing left standing. The poppies still grew. Soldiers would take them, they'd fold them up in books, and they'd send them home. And sadly, wherever a battle was, where the bodies were, the poppies would grow, and soldiers would look out for this, and they knew that some of their comrades were there. They'd also look out for stinging nettles and darker patches of grass, because they knew a body was there, and that is what they'd start to, after the war, they had to try and find these men, and that's what they did. Several different countries. The poppy is an international sign of remembrance wherever you go in the world. The purple poppy is a sign for animals that have died in war, and that's a very new thing that's come out. The French, they use the cornflower, which is a blue flower, which you see all around. The Belgians have the daisy, and the Germans have the oak leaf. The poppy is made up of 4 different parts. The black centre, designed to represent the deaf. The red for the blood that has been shed. The leaf is always stood at 12 o'clock, so the time that we remember at remembrance, and the green stem is that of new life and progression, and for those that we still look after today.